One thing that really pisses me off is that we have given so much agency to other people and we don't take personal responsibility for our own shit. Because it's interesting it being a PhD in nutrition, because if I was a PhD in theoretical physics, if we're at a dinner party and people are meeting me, they're probably not going to have too long of a conversation about string theory. But because everyone eats, everybody's formed some opinion, some association between what they put in their mouth and what happens. You can't believe yourself into flying, right? There are limits to this. But there is something to be said for when you talk to people who are really successful, you can walk away going, that person almost has a delusional level of belief in themselves. It just means your beliefs about what it does are actually more powerful than what it does. And they had a similar study with anabolic steroids. They had two people, groups of participants, trained natty, and then they gave one group a placebo and told them, this is anabolic steroids. They gained more muscle and more strength because they believed it.
Welcome to the Jen Gottlieb Show.
Hello and welcome back to the Jen Gottlieb Show. Great to see you. I wanted to pop in and give this episode the introduction it deserves. I'm really excited about the guest that is on the show today. Today, I interviewed Dr. Layne Norton, and we did it in Tampa, and I went out to Tampa last week. I actually fast-tracked this episode to get it out to you immediately because it was that good. And Layne and I talked about pretty much everything under the sun on this interview, but I wanted to make sure you all knew exactly who Layne is, why he's so awesome, and why I wanted to have him on the show before you even dive in, so you don't miss a second of this. This episode went long because we dove into every area. If you don't know Layne, he's a scientist, he's a coach, he's an author, he is a world champion athlete, he has a PhD in nutritional sciences and a BS in biochemistry, and he is pretty big on social media. I will say that. Layne has over 1 million followers on Instagram. I don't know about the rest of the platforms. And he's really, really big on creating content that debunks common fitness myths and keeps people safe from influencers on the internet that maybe are serving up some BS information that's not backed by science. And I appreciate that about Layne because there are a lot of things that I used to believe or even still will come across online. I'm like, oh my gosh, is that true? And it can cause incredible amounts of analysis paralysis when it comes to important things with health and nutrition and fitness. And Layne's a scientist. He has his PhD. He spends all of his time actually looking at studies, and he calls it randomized control trials. He's very into that and knowing okay, if an influencer is saying something, how is this backed by actual science, or is this BS that people are spreading on the internet just to get likes and follows and engagement? And so in this episode, I talked to Layne about all the things. First of all, he's one of the only health and fitness professionals or doctors I've ever had on the show so far. And the reason is because I don't know, I want to always bring you the best. And I don't really know who I can trust. And I've been listening to Layne for years and years and years. So I know that whatever I ask him, if he doesn't know the answer, he's going to say he doesn't know. But most things he actually knows the science-based reason for X, Y, and Z. And you will see. We talked about building muscle. We talked about losing weight. We talked about Ozempic. We talked about protein. We talked about exercise. We talked about being a health influencer on the internet. We talked about who you should follow and who you should listen to and who you should not. We talked about the most common myths in the fitness space right now. We talked about the most common things that people are saying that just aren't true and information that's being spread that maybe shouldn't be. We also talked about the importance of building confidence and doing hard things to build confidence and pushing through that resistance. And we went there. We went there in every area. I'm really proud of this episode. Layne's a really great guy, really stand-up person. I went all the way out to Tampa to interview him, and we had a really great time. So please, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it, tag Layne, tag me, share it with somebody that you love, and make sure you let us know what you think. I'm really, really excited. So please put on your headphones, turn up the volume, go for a walk, get in the car, whatever you do when you podcast, just tune in, be focused, and enjoy, most importantly, enjoy my conversation with Dr. Layne Norton. Layne Norton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So excited. I'm probably more excited than I even let off. So I've been a fan of yours for a really long time. Before you knew who the hell I was following you. And many of my listeners don't know that some people do, but many don't, that I used to be in the fitness business. I was a personal trainer and I was creating content online and I was telling people what to eat and I was telling people what to do. And I want to start this off with fitness myths because I'm going to just flat out say there were a lot of things that I learned on the internet from fitness influencers that I believed to be true, that I was then regurgitating to other people and saying that they were accurate. And I'm going to probably be debunked by you right now from all those things. I'm really excited about it because I want to just say I was wrong about a lot of things. And you're the first person that is a health expert, fitness expert on my podcast, and probably will be one of the only because you're the only person that I listen to.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really excited. So do you mind if we talk about a few myths?
Let's do it.
That I used to say that I think are lies?
Let's do it.
Okay. So the first question I have for you is I used to believe that there was a 1 hour window after you work out where you can get the protein in. And if you don't get your protein and your carbs and all of your macros after that 1 hour window, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the anabolic window or window of opportunity sort of thing. And this was hypothesized because exercise increases insulin sensitivity. And also, honestly, this was last weekend. I was up visiting my PhD advisor, Don Layne. He was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Nutrition. This basically came out of his lab, like a lot of stuff that people then co-opted. But they did a exhaustive exercise study and then looked at giving either just carbohydrate or a complete meal containing protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and found that only the complete meal brought protein synthesis back up. You know, after a long exercise, endurance exercise, protein synthesis was depressed. And so this kind of started the idea, well, protein synthesis is depressed. You've got to have protein right after your workout because that's going to get you back up. One of the things you have to realize with these studies, and I think that was a reasonable conclusion at the time, but with these studies is they're done fasted because when you're looking at protein synthesis, we're using something called stable isotope tracers. I don't want to get too like in the nitty gritty, but essentially you have to be at kind of a steady state. And if you already have food in your system, because the labeled isotope is on something like, for example, what we call D5-phenylalanine is what we used. So you're taking a label on an amino acid, and then you're looking at where that amino acid shows up. And based on how much of that label shows up in the muscle versus the what we call a precursor pool, which is the intracellular fluid, that determines your rate of protein synthesis. So if you're eating food and you're in a non-steady state, you can actually dilute that label, and it makes it hard to figure out like what your actual measurement is. So this is where like people don't realize, we talked about this off camera, but people just see measurements and trust measurements. And I'll never forget, Neil deGrasse Tyson was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Rogan was talking about like this UFO that they were, the Air Force was tracking, and they saw it drop, 40,000 feet like that, and no craft can do that. And Neil deGrasse Tyson goes, did he see it or did his instrument tell him that? And Rogan goes, I think it was his instrument. And he goes, and what makes you think that instrument was giving an accurate measurement? So I think a lot of times we just trust whatever we're getting and we don't question the actual ways and methods that these things are done. And again, one thing that I said about my PhD advisor was he questioned everything about all the stuff we did. Like everything we brought back, we were trying to poke holes in. Do we actually know this, right? And so what we've found out over time is that, for example, if you give a meal pre-workout, right, hour or two before you work out, those amino acids are still in your bloodstream 3, 4, probably 5 hours later. And so protein synthesis runs from a complete meal 3, 4 hours, maybe longer, depending on the size of the meal. So it's not like you're at this baseline that we kind of created because we took this measurement fasted where it falls off after exercise. If you're having adequate protein pre-workout, it's a good idea to have protein after your workout, but it's not like you got to get it in immediately or you're not going to recover or those sorts of things. What I tell people is based on the literature on protein, because you can't really store protein. It's not like carbohydrate where you've got glycogen that your body can store it as with dietary fat. Obviously you can store it in fat tissue. protein doesn't really have a storage like place. Some people will say, well, it does, you store it in muscle. And I'm like, well, that's like saying a house is a storage facility for wood. Yeah, you can tear the house down to get wood out of it, but that's not why you built it in the first place, right? So there's no real storage for protein. And so if you overeat protein, or when I say overeat, if you eat more than is required to maximize the anabolic response, you can't bank those amino acids, right? So one of the concepts that we came up with was this concept of protein distribution, which is you want to get multiple kind of stimuli in per day from meal feeding. We recommend like 3 to 5 protein containing meals per day. Now I want to be really clear too, getting enough total protein in during the day is the biggest determinant of, protein synthesis from protein. Getting it in distributed kind of evenly throughout the day is probably like I'm just making up numbers, but it's probably like the last 5%. Like it's a much smaller effect, but there does appear to be an effect. And so what I'll tell people is if you are, and again, I always have to couch this. If you're interested in being like the most muscular person you can be, then yeah, if you are training, then it makes sense to within, a couple hours have a meal before training so that you're fueled. And then within a couple hours after training to have another meal. But you're kind of going to be eating that way anyway. Like it's going to fall between 2 meals anyway, unless you're training first thing in the morning. Now, if you are training first thing in the morning, then you do kind of fit in that, well, you're fasted. And so you probably maybe are going to drop muscle protein
I train
synthesis.
fasted.
Right. And so again, what I'll tell people is, okay, what's the goal, right? Because a lot of people don't want to be like the most muscular person they can. Like I do. Like I want to be the strongest, most muscular person I possibly can be without anabolic steroids. And so these little nutrition things, okay, 4 or 5% for me is kind of a big deal, right? Because 4 or 5% at IPF Worlds and powerlifting, which I'm going to compete at in October, that's the difference between first place and 10th place. You know what I mean? So for me, I want that last little bit. So for you, if you're comfortable with your current muscle mass, then I would say, okay, well, then don't worry about it. If you like training fast, and a lot of women are like that. Like, I like to feel full when I go to train. Women don't like that. Women in general like to feel, like their waist is feeling small and they feel comfortable. But actually, while it may not sound physiologically optimal, I always tell people there is not nearly enough credit given to personal psychological preferences. If you don't feel good when you're training, like if you feel bloated or whatnot from eating beforehand, you're going to be less motivated. You're probably not going to train as hard. And so while physiologically it might not be the best thing, maybe for you it is the best thing, right? And what I would say is, okay, if you wanted to move a little bit towards better, and I always tell people, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? If you want to move a little bit towards better, okay, see if you could tolerate a whey shake beforehand, right? Because that's going to get your protein up, going to get some amino acids in the bloodstream. It's going to help get you out of that catabolic state from sleeping. And most people tolerate like a whey isolate, doesn't upset their stomach, that sort of thing. If that still upsets your stomach or you feel bloated on that, then maybe an essential amino acid solution. That might be the one case where like isolated amino acids, because they're pre-digested, you really don't have to do anything to them in digestion wise. Maybe that's something where that could work well. But if you just say, I just want to go in and train, then that's fine too, right? It's kind of walking back from theoretically optimal of what's best back to what is practical for the individual. And it's so funny, when I was younger, I used to say, well, different things work for different people. And I used to think it was physiology. And now I am much bigger on psychology. And I think in the previous till now, last 10 years, science has kind of had this disconnect where it was, your body is a bag of meat. And if you cut the bag, burn the bag, punch the bag, cut the bag, your brain sends a signal and goes, owie, right? But we always just kind of disconnected up here from down here, right? Like psychology was just a bunch of woo and feelings and stuff. And like, it doesn't actually affect it affects your body. And we now know this from, like, there was a recent publication of resistance training. They took people with major depressive disorder and general anxiety disorder. They had them resistance train 2 times a week for 25 minutes. Now, these were people who weren't training already. So I want to make this very clear, right? Because if people who already are training who have depression, maybe you're not going to get this big of a benefit from it. But they had them just do 2 25-minute sessions a week for 8 weeks. Their depression symptoms were reduced so much. I'll give you an example. So we have something called an effect size. So you have significance and effect size in scientific research and statistics. Significance essentially means that we say a p-value of less than 0.05. Statisticians who are watching this will cringe, but essentially that means that there's less than a 5% chance that the difference between the groups was due to random chance, because that does happen. You can have statistical differences that are just random. So this was significant. It was very low probability that it was random chance. But effect size measures how great was the effect, meaning clinically relevant. Okay. So when I say that, you can have a statistical difference that's like 1%. If you have enough numbers in both groups, you can pick out a small difference between groups, but that doesn't make it really clinically relevant, right? So 0.2 is considered a small effect size, 0.5 is medium, 0.8, anything above that's considered large. SSRIs get about 0.3 to 0.5 in terms of effect size, so they work, but it's a small to moderate effect size. The effect size from resistance training for 8 weeks, 2 times a week, 25 minutes, was 1.7. It was a massive effect size. So what happens in the body affects the mind, okay? And what happens in the mind affects the body. So I got really into pain science because I went through... So I've competed in powerlifting for 14 years now, 15 years. And I got a silver medal at 2015 IPF Worlds. I set a world squat record there, 668 pounds at a 205-pound bodyweight class. Got a gold medal in the squat and was like basically set up to where like silver medal overall, I'm thinking I'm going to go win worlds. And then I went through all kinds of injuries and pain, and it corresponded to the most stressful period of my life. And I had started doing some reading on what's called the biopsychosocial model of pain. And basically it was talking about how psychological stress, lack of sleep, ruminating? Yes.
Ruminating
God, why am I struggling with that word? Ruminating on pain. Yep. So if you have an injury, like just continue to focus on it, think about it. All these things showed massive effects on your, what they call a pain experience. So people think pain is, like I said, you cut the bag, burn the bag, whatever, your brain goes, owie. And now we know that, yeah, like if somebody cuts your arm off, yeah, it'll hurt. Okay. But there is this idea that it's just, if you have pain, you must have tissue damage. And if you have tissue damage, you must have pain. That's not supported by research literature. So, and you look at somebody who loses a limb. Years later, they can have pain, not at the stump, but where the limb was. How is that possible, right? People who, they did a study where they did sleep restriction, 8 hours versus 4 hours, 240% increase in the risk of acute injury with low sleep. And they showed that low sleep they refer to pain as a gate and like an emotion. Okay, so you have a pain experience, like I said. If you get less sleep, it opens that pain gate. Psychological stress opens that pain gate. And then if you look at people who have autoimmune disorders and like IBS, very, very high correlation between IBS and psychological disorders. People who have autoimmune disorders, usually you can trace it back to a lot of mental stress, trauma. These things appear to be interconnected. And I'll just give a personal anecdote. So I struggled with this for like 7 years. And when I left my last marriage, it was a very stressful relationship. And like, I'm not making a statement about that person. It was stressful for her too. But when I left that relationship, within 2 weeks, I got noticeably stronger in the gym. like not an accident, like noticeably stronger, was recovering better, felt less pain. And I'm like, what is going on? Because I was actually sleeping less too. And I realized, oh yeah, my body's not vibrating all the time. I'm not stuck in fight or flight all the time. And so now I joke with people, I'm like Bob Marley, more so, I'm like, something stressful happened and I'll be like, but like I saw how much managing my psychological stress affected my training and how much better it made my training. So I really doubled down on that. And then that actually started making my overall life better, And I think one of the things that I've really seen in the stress literature too is it's pervasive throughout everything. So are you familiar with the ACEs score?
No.
So I think it's Adverse Childhood Events Score. I want to say, psychologist, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But basically, a score of 0 would be something like you had a great childhood, your parents were loving, you always felt provided for, love was given freely, you never felt scared for your safety. A 10 is you were abused, you never felt safe, you didn't know if you were worried about if you were going to be able to eat, like basic needs were something you were very worried about, right? So there is like a dose response of the ACEs score, cardiovascular disease, cancer, mortality. People who are higher on this, on average, live shorter, have higher risk of cancer, higher risk of heart disease. So this stuff is very pervasive. And I feel like, again, it's actually been very liberating for me to think about the fact that what happens up here affects down here, what happens down here affects up here. And that's why now you'll hear me say so much, I don't really care about theoretical optimal. I care about what can this person consistently execute, day after day. And this is what I see with the whole biohacking community. I'm like, if you did every single thing that you're saying to do to biohack, when do you actually have time to, I don't know, work and exercise? You got a biohacking program that's 5 hours long. Do they make a little difference? Maybe. But if I always tell people, the comparison quote is like, don't step over dollars to pick up pennies, right? If we're trying to pick up as much rocks as we can, we'll pick up the boulders first. And then if I can pick up some pebbles, I'll pick up the pebbles. But I'm not going to pick up pebbles if it causes me to drop the boulder, right? And so you see this, and this is the problem with the fire hose of social media. People are not equipped to pick out what's more important than something else. Like they need to have it structured to them as, okay, this is your primary thing. These are secondary things. They're not equipped to look at that, just like somebody can cite a study and they don't know it's in vitro or in a lab animal versus like a human randomized control trial. People don't know how to weigh those against each other. And so I think that's one of the things that's hard about social media.
There's so much analysis paralysis out there. What I'm seeing a lot is, even with myself, I'm like, I have to unfollow everybody because there's so many opinions. One day it's this, the next day it's that. And like all the biohacking things that I need to do, I'm like, this would be a full-time job. And then I start to feel like left out. Like, oh, but I'm not doing this and I should do this. And I'm not cold plunging enough and I'm not saunaing enough and I'm not doing this and the peptides and oh my gosh. So I have had to unfollow everyone and just focus on what's most important to me. And that's why I love the way that you communicate, because it's for the individual to get your butt up and go move. I love where we're going though with mental health. I think it's really important because I think that they do coincide.
Oh yeah.
The mental and the physical. I agree so much. And I want to know, for the person that's listening right now, that's like, I can't even get, like, what comes first? Can we go work out and move our body to get our mental state better? Or do we need to get our mental state better in order to go and move our body in the way that works the best? Because you just said, like, I was so anxious, and when my divorce finalized and I felt better, then I was in the gym and I was stronger. Which way?
I think there's crosstalk between the two. And I'm not a mental health expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I give a lot of credit to my friend John Deloney, who's got a great podcast on it. One thing he would always say to people that never really registered, but they would say something, he goes, and where do you feel that? Or like, he would always talk about anxiety in terms of your body. And I always thought about anxiety as up here, right? And No, you feel it in your body, right? Like you actually get a physiological response to anxiety, right? And he's big on exercise, obviously. Here's what I'll tell people. If you're always waiting to feel a certain way to do something, you're never going to get stuff done. Like you've got to take the leap. What do they say? Sometimes take the leap, the faith comes after, something like that. If you're always waiting to feel a certain way or feel good about something, like feelings aren't what gets things done. Feelings are important. And I think for a long time, we tried to, the rub dirt on it, whatever, like that's probably too far in one direction. But I think now we've gone back too far. We've almost given like too much power to feelings. Because how many times have you made a decision based on a feeling and it worked out really great versus like actually sitting down and like looking at the data, the logic and really thinking about it, right? I'm not saying it never works out. But feelings are informative. And one of the things I like about what John says when he talks about anxiety, he goes, everyone tries to stop anxiety. Anxiety is like your smoke alarm going off. If your smoke alarm is going off, figure out where the smoke is coming from. You don't have anxiety for no reason. It's because your body feels unsafe. For some reason, you need to, instead of trying to take the batteries out of the smoke alarm, figure out what's causing the smoke alarm to go off. Because if you want to get rid of anxiety, the way to do it isn't by taking the batteries out of the smoke alarm. And he's not against anti-anxiety medication. He'll even say like that can get, some people regulated enough so they can start dealing with their problems. But he's like, you have to deal with the root problem. Oh, you're in a bunch of debt. Well, no wonder you have anxiety, right? Oh, you're in an abusive relationship. No wonder you have anxiety, right? So I think anything that's going to be a big change is going to be hard. There's no way through it. But I like what Brad Stolberg said. He wrote a book called Master of Change. And he had a post the other day and he said, change has always been looked at as a negative, that it's chaos and we need to try to get back to what things were before. The reality is that life is change, and the people who function best in life are the people who can basically just stay regulated during change. Not that you have to accept that you like what's changing or whatnot, but you ride the wave, right? And one of the things I've found in my life is emotions go up and down. But your decisions, your principles are what's important. I think Eric Thomas, what did he said, don't operate, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he's like, don't operate based on feelings. Because when you don't feel like getting out of bed. A lot of times you don't feel like going to the gym. But if those are your principles and you do those, guess what? Over time, you end up enjoying those things, So you have to take the leap and do the work first and trust that over time, if people think action follows motivation, and I think it's actually kind of the other way around. And I speak to entrepreneurs about this all the time. I'm like, 99% of you are, enough. It's time to go.
Start before you're ready.
You are, I think Mark Zuckerberg had a great quote about, somebody asked him what failures entrepreneurs should avoid. And he said, don't even bother trying. It's impossible. Like you starting 100% guarantees you are going to fail. What's important is to learn from those things. But most people get stuck in the aim, and they never pull the trigger. They never go for a lot of reasons. But I think a lot of it is they feel like I just don't have enough information yet. I just got to get everything lined up and these tend to be like more of the type A perfectionist style personalities, which, hey, there's some great things about being a perfectionist, have high attention to detail, all that kind of stuff, but they do tend to get stuck in, and I think one of the reasons that I've been successful, it's hurt me at times, is that I go, I'm going to jump and we'll figure out the kinks on the way down. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to like trying to get your mind right to go exercise, you can't think yourself healthy. You can say positive things yourself. I think that's important for sure. I think therapy's great. I'm a big fan of all those. but you can't think yourself into action. You just have to kind of do it, and even if it doesn't feel good. And I'm not saying you've got to go into the gym and go 2 hours, 3-4 times a week or whatever. No. If walking is a tough starting point for you, just start walking, start doing something, get outside. If you're somebody suffering and just, say, I always tell people there's this big push about confidence now, ways to be confident. And I'm like, you can't read about confidence. You can't tell yourself I'm confident. Confidence comes through the experience of attempting hard things, failing, pushing through, and seeing what happens when you do that, because then you truly become confident. Because I always tell people now, like, all the worst things that I've worried about happening in my business and personal life have happened. And I'm still here, and I'm still doing better than I ever have. So now you can't kind of mess with me mentally. Like, yeah, like I'll have days where I'm down, or like, if my lower back starts acting up or whatever, I'll be like, it gets annoying. But I also have a ton of data previous to look at to go, nope, I'm a bad mother. Can I curse?
Yes, you can.
I'm a bad motherfucker.
Yes, you are.
And I know I'll get through this, But if you've never attempted hard stuff, if you've never worked your way through things, then you're not going to have that confidence. The only way to do it is to start. And I mean, I wish I had some magic solution for people out there, but it really is like a bad game plan executed now is better than a great game plan executed too late. Like, because at least you'll learn from the bad.
It's a masterclass, honestly. And there's so many analogies with like lifting and working out and confidence, because you can only grow your muscles and build them by going and putting in the hard work and being unbelievably uncomfortable. So you're really, really good at sitting in the discomfort, at being uncomfortable, at feeling pain, because you're equipped from all of that experience.
So I agree with you. There's so many parallels. And I always tell people, lifting made me more confident, not because I got strong, not because I got bigger muscles, not because I look better, but because of the lessons it taught me working through setbacks. It taught me, man, I can feel at the bottom of the universe and I can come back, And I always tell people, if the only lesson you got from lifting weights was bigger muscles, you missed what it was trying to teach you. Okay. But I just think like that level of doing hard stuff, there's so many analogies, and I'll give you one my coach, Zach Robinson, said. So he coaches me for powerlifting, does all my programming. And he said, adaptation is never comfortable. When you're trying to grow muscles, what happens? You're doing hard stuff. You have pain. You have discomfort. It's not fun, right? But what happens? You adapt, and now you can handle that stressor better, right? So I tell people, my best ever squat, 668 pounds. When I first came in the gym, I could squat like 95 pounds, right? And I always thought like, wow, if I could squat that much, 500 pounds is going to feel easy. No, it doesn't. It doesn't feel easy, okay? It still feels like 500 pounds. It doesn't get easier. I got better at handling it. I think Bruce Lee said, don't pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to endure a hard life. And I think if a lot of people could just reframe, I think social media has made this harder too. If they could just reframe when they're going through hard things, like, I'm going to learn so much from this. It's okay to like, yeah, it sucks. But if so many people just knew how normal that was, if they looked at like every single person they look up to, they're like, oh, that person has their shit together so much. I'm a hot mess in many ways, okay? Like, I may seem like I have my shit together, in other areas of life, I can be a hot mess. All right, now I've gotten better. I can almost promise you that any person you look up to can say the same thing if they're being honest, okay? We all have insecurities. We all have this kind of stuff. The important thing is to not let it paralyze you and make you feel like, wow, like, I think social media has made people feel very alone because they see, wow, look at this person. They're always crushing it, always crushing it, always crushing it. No, they're not. No, they're not. You just didn't see when they weren't crushing it, right? Like, I've been very open about my injuries and powerlifting and my pain. And everybody's like, oh, you're injury prone. I'm like, no, I'm not. I just talk about it. Other people don't talk about it. They just, all of a sudden, they just don't post lifting videos anymore. Or it's always Throwback Thursday or whatever it is, right? You see this with fitness competitors. It's only heavily filtered, adjusted images from when they were super lean or whatever. And I've actually had people like, the body dysmorphia in the fitness industry is real. I'll post a picture and people go, oh, you kind of let yourself go. I'm like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, I walk down the beach, I still look better than 99% of people. Like, yeah, I don't look like, a shredded bodybuilder at competition, but I'm not trying to be, But so many people, when that's your filter, you get so used to that. And I think one hack so if you want some hacks for reducing anxiety and stress and being like more zen, stop watching the news. Don't follow accounts that make you feel bad. Even if they're nice people, some nice people, really great people, it might make you feel bad. Unfollow. You should not be following anyone that doesn't make you feel anything other than like either you laugh or you feel inspired, or like if somebody's making you feel bad and maybe they inspire a bunch of other people, for you it's not working, stop following. You can curate your own feed. And one thing that really pisses me off is that we have given so much agency to other people and we don't take personal responsibility for our own shit. And that is turn off the news. Okay? And people go, well, the news, they're only showing negative stuff. No. They show negative stuff because that's what you want to see. Because if everybody tomorrow stood up and said, we are not standing for this shit anymore, we're not going to watch the news if it's all fear-mongering nonsense, we're only going to watch it if they're just reporting it and if they're also putting in positive stories. If people actually did that, in 3 months, I promise you, all of them would change the way they do things, because they don't give a shit if they're reporting positive or negative news. They just care about your eyeballs. That's their currency. And the same thing for social media. So there's a reason that when I do a debunk or I do an educational video, I'll get a few thousand shares. There's a reason when somebody does a video saying oatmeal is toxic, it gets 1 million shares. Because fear evokes an emotional response, and people don't make decisions based off logic. They make most of their decisions based off emotion. And so that gets shared a lot more. And so again, people say, oh, we hate all this BS content out here. You're voting with your shares. You're voting with your likes. And your votes say you like stress. Your votes say you like negativity. Your votes say you're actually somewhat, not physiologically, but you're somewhat addicted to negativity and stress based on what you are liking, what you are sharing, what you're observing. That is in your power to change. I don't follow one single person that I don't feel good about following. I don't watch the news. Like I follow a few accounts on Instagram that are like basically just report it, don't give their spin. But you're watching the news about, oh, we could have thermonuclear war. Yeah, no wonder you have anxiety. You don't feel safe. Of course you have anxiety. But so many people just don't even realize how stuck in that negative loop they are.
You're listening to The Jen Gottlieb Show.
I love where we're going. I wasn't even going to ask you this, but now I want to because it's coming to me because you have a daughter.
Hit me up.
You have an amazing, amazing daughter. I just watch her on your stories all the time.
She's the best.
She makes me so happy. There's
so much personality.
So much personality. And I feel for young girls and young women right now because of social media in such a big way. And I have a method called the IDS method. I don't scroll. I don't mindlessly scroll anymore because I can unfollow a whole bunch of people, but either way, the algorithm just shoots shit at me that I don't want to see. So I have to intentionally, I'm going to go to Layne's profile today and look at what he created today, or I'm going to go connect with a friend, but I can't do this. I don't scroll. I put it down if I catch myself doing it because it wastes so much time. It makes me feel like shit when I'm done because I'm comparing myself to everybody's filtered images, everybody's whatever. You don't know what they do with face tuning and all that stuff. And I know that there's fitness influencers out there that are selling their services and they are putting out images that aren't necessarily real. And there are young women especially. There's men too. And I think that there's a big body dysmorphia thing happening with men as well. Sure. But I can speak only to, I'm a woman and I'm experiencing this. Thinking, oh my God, well, I have to now do what she's doing and she's only eating this. This is what I eat in a day. And it's 4 rice cakes and a protein shake. I would love to hear just your opinion on this, or maybe what you would tell your daughter who's going to be growing up in this.
I mean, we've already had some of these conversations. I mean, she wants a phone and I'm like, no, I'm going to push that off as long as I possibly can. I think that, I as a 42-year-old male who's pretty secure, struggle with getting into social media too much at times. And I've justified it before as, it's work or whatever. No, it's made to get your eyeballs on it and keep them there, And so, yeah, I've been very staunch about, no, you're not going to have a phone. Like, maybe at some point you'll have like a flip phone if you need to text us or call us or something like that. But like, I grew up, I didn't get my first cell phone until I was 22. I survived. I was fine,
Eventually she'll get a phone. Eventually she'll need one. She'll have some sort of social media.
Yep.
And she will see, these pages.
And it's already happened. I mean, we were having, pizza a few weeks ago, and she goes, "Daddy, I don't want pizza. It's fattening." And I was like, I had to like step out of the room because I'm like, oh man, like she's 7, that's what a heartbreaking thing to hear from a girl. And most eating disorders start young for girls. And like one of the things I used to tell at seminars, I'm like, women, ladies, if you have daughters and you call yourself fat, you are setting your daughter up for an eating disorder. Like, so many daughters. There's a couple big predictors. A lot of people who have eating disorders, they can trace it back to a comment somebody made when they were like 13, or like even if the mother isn't shaming her own daughter, if she's shaming herself, your kids follow your actions. I remember reading a blog from a gal who was like, I remember the first time I found out my mom was fat. I was 5 years old, and I always thought my mom was beautiful. And when she called herself fat, I realized, oh, I'm fat. Neither of them are fat, Also, especially for girls, having a strong relationship with their father is really important for, it doesn't prevent it, but like you're lower risk of getting this eating disorder if you have a strong relationship with your father. So obviously like I can control that. So I try to do that. I just said to her, I'm like, honey, listen, there are no bad foods. Okay. There are foods that help us grow. There are foods that are conducive to us being healthier. And then there are some foods that taste better, and we just got to be careful about how much of those we eat. But it's not bad. You can have some. Dad has some, and I'm perfectly healthy, And, it's funny that I think the hardest part about social media is I've had people say some really nasty shit about my kids, on social media about like if we're, if I take a picture and there's a piece of pizza in the picture or something like that, people come on, can't believe you're feeding your kids that processed, toxic garbage, And I'm like, yeah, because I've seen the downstream effects of that. Because I worked with over 1,000 women for 15 years and maybe not diagnosed eating disorders, but I would say the majority had somewhat of a disordered relationship with food. In terms of their viewpoints of food. And, people, like when it comes to processed food and stuff, they're always like, well, if we just got rid of it or if we just didn't eat, guess what? Hard to put the bullet back in the gun. Okay. So we need to figure out how we manage things with how the real world is rather than going, well, if we just got rid of everything, not going to happen. Okay. So we need to learn how to manage it. And part of it is not creating these weird associations, because when you say things like, processed foods are toxic, it doesn't have the effect that you intend it to have, which the effect you intend to have is, well, people will stop eating it. They'll stop eating it until they can't, until they get exposed to it or until they're out somewhere. And now, since they really believe it's toxic, instead of just having a little bit of it and going, okay, well, that was nice, they go crazy and they eat a ton of it. And I remember I was going to do this debate on clean eating versus flexible dieting, which is what I do, which is I basically like track my macros.
I want to hear the difference between clean eating and flexible dieting and macro tracking.
So, clean eating doesn't really have an objective definition. It's kind of like, because if you're a vegan, meat is not clean. If you're, depending on your tribe, what is clean for you is different. But typically it's like, minimally processed food, whole food, that sort of thing, right? Which is great. I think most of your nutrition should be made up of that stuff, right? But if you look at the research data, when probably the most extreme study I saw was everybody for a long time, sugar, you can't have sugar, inflammation, blah, 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 blah. There was a study where they had 2 groups of people and they controlled all the things they ate for 6 weeks. They provided all the food to participants And they had them in a calorie deficit. Both groups were in a calorie deficit, but one group was eating over 100 grams of sugar per day, like sucrose. The other group was eating like 10. There was like a 100-gram difference between these two groups. But calories were the same, protein was the same, everything else was the same. Lost the exact same amount of weight. All their blood markers improved. If you look at Mark Haub, who did the Twinkie diet professor, he had a bet with his class because they said they thought the foods you eat mattered more than how much you eat for weight loss. And so he started with, they called it the 7-Eleven diet, and then later switched it to the Twinkie diet. But basically he ate 1,800 calories a day from all processed food. I think he would drink like a protein shake and take a multivitamin just to make sure he had his bases covered. He lost 27 pounds and all his blood markers got better. Now, he did say, I was pretty hungry, because it wasn't very satiating, right? So the point is, I'm not saying you should eat processed foods. The point is, you can have them as part of your overall diet. As long as your overall diet is healthy, and you are eating enough minimally processed food, you are getting in enough fiber, you are getting in enough like variety of foods, they can be part of that as long as, your energy expenditure is high enough to accommodate for that. I mean, it's kind of energy filler. But I was going to debate this guy on clean eating versus flexible dieting. And my opening argument, he backed out of it. But my opening argument was, I get so many people backing out of debates,
Sure.
was I had been on his Facebook. This is like 2013, 14, before Instagram kind of overtook Facebook. And he had a cheat meal every week. And I, using those pictures, added up the calories approximately from his cheat meal, one day per week, and compared them to what I ate throughout the week, just kind of having it in moderation whenever I wanted. Turns out he was eating more calories from junk food than I was. And my opening argument was going to be, so you're telling me if you binge eat this stuff once per week, that's fine. But having it in moderation throughout the week, that's bad. Please make this math make sense to me, right? And so I'm not saying flexible dieting is a solution for everybody. It's certainly not. Like, some people get really stressed out from tracking. They don't like it. That's totally fine, right? If you want to lose weight, you have to restrict in some way, but you can kind of pick the form of restriction that feels the least restrictive to you. For some people, that's intermittent fasting. For some people, that's low carb. For some people, that's low fat. For me, flexible dieting, tracking doesn't give me anxiety. Like, I developed my own nutrition coaching app, which has a barcode scanner and a label scanner, all that kind of stuff. And you use carbon. Okay, cool. So, that takes 5 minutes of my day. It's not hard, right? So I'd rather do that restriction and be able to eat the foods that I like to eat and fit them in moderation than you got to do low carb. But some people hate tracking and love low carb. Both are useful tools. And so I think the problem becomes, again, I like to make economic or financial comparisons. There's an economist named Thomas Sowell, and he said, in order to have compassionate policy, you must have dispassionate analysis of the data. And what he meant by that was a lot of politicians make laws based on feelings and based on intentions rather than looking at what does it actually do? Like, what is the outcome, right? So if we look at, the intention of telling people processed foods are toxic is to get them to eat less processed foods so that they'll get healthier. That's a good intention. What's the outcome, though? Well, I've seen it, and a lot of times it's people getting disordered eating habits, and actually it has the opposite effect, where they end up consuming more of these things because they're trying to restrict, boom, then they go off the deep end. Because they feel like, if I can't totally avoid, I've just totally blown it, and whatever. And I like what Spencer Nadolsky said. It's like, having a chip and then eating the entire bag because you just had one chip, that's like, you get a flat, and so you slash your other 3 tires, right? No, you can have this stuff in moderation. And that was actually how, my own personal anecdote was, I tried to eat clean when I started my bodybuilding career. And I was in college. My buddies would order a pizza. And you want some, Layne? And I'd end up eating an entire large pizza by myself. And I kind of is it the pizza that's killing my progress, or is the fact that I eat the whole thing, right? And so then I just started tracking and being moderate, and I found that I can modify my body composition however I want, and my blood markers were good, all that kind of stuff. So I tell people, whatever gets you consistent, that is what works for you. It's not physiological difference. It's whatever trips that compliance algorithm in your head. That is, compliance is the science. We can talk about pie in the sky, whatever. I mean, entrepreneurship, same thing.
Same thing.
Saving money, same thing. You can have all the hacks in the world. You can do all the whatever. It comes down to, what do you consistently execute on a daily basis? That's what makes the difference.
I have goosebumps on this. All right. I want to talk about something, though, because people are thinking about something they've probably heard about, which is metabolism. A fast metabolism versus a slow metabolism. I've heard people say to me, like, I just have a slow metabolism. How do I speed up my metabolism? If I eat more, will I speed it up? Or what about like cortisol? Does that slow it down? If I do too much cardio, am I going to slow my metabolism? I'm sure you hear all of these questions. Hormonal stuff.
Okay, so I think the answer is going to really disappoint people based on the scientific literature. Okay, so we got to define two terms. First off, metabolism typically is what's referred to as your basal metabolic rate, so your BMR, which is how many calories do you burn at rest, just doing nothing, right? That's your metabolism, okay? Your energy expenditure is how many total calories you burn per day. A lot of people interchange these two. These are not the same things. So your metabolism is literally just your BMR. It's the cost of keeping the lights on, right? Your energy expenditure includes your BMR, which is a big portion for most people, like 50 to 70% of your total energy expenditure. But then you've got physical activity, which goes into two buckets. Obviously exercise, but then you also have what's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically like fidgeting, pacing, postural. It's all unconscious movements. That actually is a pretty big portion of your physical activity per day. People don't realize this. And then you have what's called your thermic effect of food, which our bodies are kind of like internal combustion engines, which is you got to put some energy in to get some energy out, but you always get more energy out than you put in, okay? So now that we've defined those terms, let's talk about, first of all, metabolism, and then I'll bring it back to total energy expenditure. So if we look at the research data on metabolic rates across large populations, 80 to 90% of the variance in metabolic rate is completely explained by lean mass. So you can predict someone's metabolic rate typically within 80 to 90% just based on how much lean body mass they have.
So with this stay, I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second. The more muscle mass you have, the faster your metabolism is, or the calories you burn at rest?
Yes. Now, the if you want to get really like split hairs, each organ has its own kind of metabolic rate.
Wow.
Skeletal muscle in terms of lean tissue actually tends to be on the slower side. It's still way faster than adipose tissue. But like the liver is probably one of your most metabolically active organs, your heart, your gastrointestinal tract. Those things on a per gram tissue basis all burn more than muscle. But muscle does burn more. And so if you do have more muscle and more lean mass, yes, you'll have a higher energy expenditure, higher metabolic rate. And so yes, like if you build muscle, you'll burn more at rest. But they have done so many studies looking at obese versus lean, type 2 diabetics versus non. There's no difference in BMR. In fact, people who are obese on average have higher BMRs, significantly higher BMRs than people who don't. Now, that's because obese people tend to have more lean mass because they carry around more. When they correct for lean mass in obese, they have the same metabolic rate as people who are not. Now, there's always exceptions. There are people like hypothyroidism, that does make a difference. But again, the difference is not as much as people would expect. People say, well, I can't lose weight because I'm hypothyroid. In the vast majority of cases, hypothyroidism might drop 100, 150 calories per day off your daily energy expenditure, which is not nothing, but it's not, you can't lose weight. Like for you, what you need for a calorie deficit is just lower than what you predict. And oh, by the way, you can get an endocrinologist to, prescribe you thyroid hormone and correct this deficiency. And I found so many, and especially women tend to fall more in this bucket. So, well, my hormones are messed up. Okay, what are they? Let me see your blood work. Oh, I haven't had them done. Well, why not? 2 reasons. Boils down to personal responsibility, in my opinion. They don't want to know because right now they have a catch-all to obfuscate personal responsibility. If they did get them measured and they weren't abnormal, then that excuse is no longer valid. Or if they got the measure and they are low, now they can fix that, and that excuse is no longer valid, right? This probably sounds very cold the way I'm saying it, but I want people, so many people feel powerless because, well, I have this thing. You're not powerless. Personal responsibility may seem incredibly uncomfortable, but it is freedom, as Jocko Willink says, because if it's partly, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to deal with whatever cards you got dealt, right? So if we look at the studies on metabolism, they just don't see big differences. And if we think about, like, let's go to the weight loss drugs, because we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
The weight loss drug industry was so focused on metabolism side for 40 years, and we got nowhere. And in 10 years of them focusing on the appetite side, we got everywhere, right? So I've had people say, well, I've got a slow metabolism. I need to take Ozempic. Well, you're going to be pretty disappointed because Ozempic doesn't do anything to metabolic rate. Sorry. It's a powerful appetite suppressant. So if you lost weight on Ozempic, it's just because you ate less. Now, again, people don't like that answer because it feels very, well, you're saying that I was lazy or a glutton. No, I'm not saying that. If you look at studies of obese people, on average, they get a greater reward from food brain-wise than a lean person. Obese women, 50% more likely to have some kind of sexual assault trauma in their past. Like, I'm not saying that it's laziness. And that actually really bothers me. And I actually used to be like that probably 20 years ago. If you're obese, it's just because you're lazy. Well, how many examples do we need of obese people who crush it in other areas of life that requires a lot of discipline to show that, doesn't necessarily transfer across, right? Like, you look at somebody like me who's so consistent with, but there's some areas in life that I really struggle. Like, I really struggle with having boundaries. Like that in my personal relationships, it's actually kind of screwed up a lot of personal relationships for me. I've really struggled, like in personal relationships with not stonewalling or, like those sorts of things. But over here, I got all this shit sorted out. So why can't I take it? Because stuff doesn't translate, like it doesn't always translate. I think that the good thing about having seen me improve in lifting weights is I believe that I can get better at some things. And so I do try to get better. I think a lot of people think, well, I was just fated to this. You're not fated to it. Like, there is no fate. That's all bullshit. So metabolism wise, yes, there are some people who have slower metabolisms, but if they are, they're the outliers. They're the less than 2.5% of people, right? The vast majority of folks, it is on the appetite side of things. And again, I'm not saying I'm not laying blame or anything like that, because if you look at, people want to talk about genetics because they'll say, well, if you have one parent that's obese, you're 40% more likely to become obese. You have two people, 80% more likely to become obese. So, obesity is obviously genetic. Yeah, well, our genetics didn't flip a switch in the last 70 years. Like, in 2 generations, our entire population changed. What happened is we had genetic. So my PhD advisor has a great line, Dr. Layne, give me a shout out for this. He said, genetics loads the gun for obesity. It's behavior that pulls the trigger. And so what you've had is, so think about even going back 70 years ago. We had ultra processed food. We had hyperpalatable food. We had cakes, cookies, all that kind of stuff. But you had to walk to the bakery to get it, right? You couldn't just pop on your phone and order a bunch of stuff from 7-Eleven, right? You weren't just like out somewhere random and you could just grab a thing of M&Ms, right? So we have been exposed to ultra-processed hyperpalatable foods, which are so easy to overeat. And our brains are not equipped to be able to handle that. And that's where all appetite regulation occurs, is in the brain. And it just overrides our satiety signals. It's not that it's toxic. It's not that these chemicals in there are no, it is really, really tasty, not very satiating. And our brains are working with data from 10,000 years ago of what food was like 10,000 years ago. And it's simply not equipped to be able to appropriately regulate our appetites in response to this. So again, I think it's actually been great that there's been so much focus on appetite in the last 10 years because appetite is so complicated. I took a full course in grad school and I walked out going, I have no idea what all this stuff means. I mean, there's so many players. There's at least a dozen hormones that are major players in appetite. And sometimes one matters, but only when this other one is present. And like, there's so much crosstalk here. And I'm going to divert a little bit, but it's one of the things I really focus on. I mean, if you watch my videos, you know, I scream human randomized control trials, right? I focus on outcomes rather than mechanisms. And what I mean by that is a mechanism would be like, well, you don't want to, I did a video last week on something Dr. Gundry said, and I'll use the example. He said, you don't want to take in whey protein because it has NUE5-GC, which is it's inflammatory. It'll make your joints ache. It's going to be gut busting, artery busting. And I'm like, okay, so this is a mechanism, right? So does this compound exist in whey protein? I've never actually personally looked into it. Sure, probably. Meat has it too, okay? But at what dosage? And how does it interact with all the other things in there? Because foods aren't isolated compounds. This is a food matrix, okay? So, and outcomes, physiological outcomes, are not just one mechanism. These are dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of biochemical pathways and signals all summing up to an outcome. And one of the great things about my PhD advisor was he had me look at everything, and he could beautifully integrate biochemistry, which was my undergrad, which was his undergrad, into how it affects the whole body. Okay, he understood how the little stuff affected the big stuff and vice versa. So again, what I do is I go, oh, gee, if only we had studies where they gave people whey protein and looked at inflammation and risk factors for cardiovascular. Oh, wait, we have that. And what do they show? They actually show the opposite. Whey protein decreases inflammation, decreases some risk factors for cardiovascular disease like triglycerides, might even help with insulin sensitivity. And in every study, it's either neutral or good, right? So, okay, I am open to the idea that every single food we eat may have positives and negatives to it. The question is not whether or not they have positives or negatives in them. The question is, what is the overall effect, right? That's the question. It would be like me, another financial example, a mutual fund. Okay, a mutual fund is a bunch of little stocks all broken up, right? I can say, Jen, don't invest in this mutual fund. Look at these two stocks in here that are down 50% this year, while completely avoiding telling you that the overall mutual fund is up 25%. What do you care? Do you care about those two stocks, or do you care about the overall mutual fund is killing it? You care about the overall mutual fund. And you can, for any food, you can find an isolated compound that if you overfed it would cause all kinds of problems. And again, people have a hard time holding like two seemingly opposing ideas in both hands, right? And I just think that, people aren't equipped scientifically to really understand it. Another great example, aspirin. Okay, so aspirin, we know, is an anticoagulant, right? So it thins blood. That's why they give it to people who have heart attacks or at risk for heart attacks. Did you know that aspirin also activates procoagulant pathways? But the overall effect is obviously the activation of those anticoagulant pathways is much more powerful than the procoagulant pathways. And I'll give you one more example of how this is more to speak about cherry picking. But you can, if you want to push any narrative, you can cherry pick and make inappropriate citations to form what seems to be a scientifically backed opinion. Smoking's good for you. Here's why. Did you know consistently in research literature, smoking decreases the risk of Parkinson's by about 40%? That's actually real. That's real. Very consistent in the literature. And I could pick out a couple of studies where smoking, so there's this, I read this big meta-analysis of smoking and the risk of adenocarcinoma. There were about 50 studies in this meta-analysis that were included. So a meta-analysis is basically a study of studies. And 2 of these studies showed no risk of adenocarcinoma with smoking. In fact, they actually showed like a really small, non-significant protective effect. So if I pick those 2 studies and say, well, look at this, it doesn't increase the risk of cancer. and it might even protect a little bit. Oh, by the way, it decreases the risk of Parkinson's. I have just used scientific citations to form a completely unscientific opinion, right? So, by the way, the 48 other studies, way high, like the overall effect is like a 400% increased risk of adenocarcinoma. What do I care about? The 2 studies that didn't show anything or the 48 other ones, right? So you have to be careful about who you follow on social media because of all this stuff. And most people are not equipped to really go through the wherewithal to like look up scientific studies. So that's why I created Reps, my research review, to like, kind of help people understand this. But just to give an example of how little people question this stuff, I did a debunk of Paul Saladino's appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I had 283 references in that debunk. It was 50 pages in a Google Doc. It was monstrous. And we make it easy on my website. Like if you click the reference, you can click it and go straight to it. So you can see if the reference says what I say it says. Less than 1% of people who read that article, and there was hundreds of thousands of people who read the article, less than 1% of people clicked on a single citation. So, and then I speaking of which, I got a question yesterday, or 2 days ago on my Instagram, which was, is there anyone you follow that you completely believe everything they say and you don't question? I said, absolutely not. Even my PhD advisor. And he would tell you the same thing. And because the scientific method is perfect, but humans do it, and humans are imperfect, myself included. I have my own personal biases. I have my own personal beliefs. I try to always question those. And if I do have a bias on something, I try to be honest and open about it. But I still have those. I'm still an imperfect, dumb primate in many ways, So I tell people, you can have more trust in somebody. That's fine. I think there are people who have proven that they're more trustworthy than others. But it's a bad idea to ever completely turn your brain off. Okay. And I think what people want is just to be able to just turn their brains off and follow somebody. That's it. Right. Now, do I think that I'm going to lead somebody astray if they just follow everything I say? No, I don't think they're going to get like bad advice and end up sick or anything from it. But I tell people, listen to the way people talk even more than what they say, which is, if you listen to me speak for any period of time, very rarely do I use words like best, worst, always, never. Don't really use those. Also, if I'm talking about something increasing a risk for something, you won't hear me go toxic or just use any kind of fear to try to like hook you in. People who use fear-based marketing or fear-based content, stop following them. Like, they're not evidence-based. Okay. And also, the one other thing, if people make something an identity where they're a hammer and everything looks like a nail, if you call yourself the low carb doc, or you call yourself carnivore Katie, or you call yourself vegan Vince, or whatever it is, that's your identity. You have a really hard time walking that back, right? And somebody who I actually respect, because they did change what they say over time, was Thomas DeLauer, very much in the low carb camp. Now he still likes low carb, but he's become much more reasonable about it. His audience turned on him in many ways. Like, a lot of them got very angry with him for basically being more reasonable, because it becomes this like tribal us versus them kind of mentality when you make it an identity, That's why you won't find flexible dieting in my bio. You won't find macro master. You won't find that stuff, because I don't want to hitch my wagon to anything, I hitch my wagon to data. Somebody said I'm religious about science. I'm like, okay, yeah, I like data. I like objective things. I don't, feelings are, hey, your personal experience is relevant for you, but feelings are just feelings, and they will lie to you many times. And also, we were talking about this earlier. Once I learned about how powerful the effect of placebo was, now I just, like, when a study comes out, I just go, I'll wait till there's 10 because I don't believe anything anymore. I'll just give you one example of that. So I know I'm kind of droning on, but all this always triggers more thoughts.
Keep going.
Just to give people an example of how powerful placebo is, because people think when somebody says that's a placebo effect, they think, oh, they're saying that my experience was a lie. That is not what that's saying. It's talking about the power of suggestion, the power of your mind. Okay. So there was I'll probably butcher the specifics of the study, but they were looking at polymorphisms on genes for appetite and actually like heat regulation, I think, heat dissipation. I'll focus on the appetite stuff, but they were looking at ghrelin, which is a hormone that basically increases hunger, okay? And they identified people who were kind of naturally high ghrelin secretors versus low, but then they randomly told them what they were. Okay, so you had people who were low ghrelin, told they were low ghrelin told they were high told they were low, and high told they were high. Do you know it didn't matter what their genetics were? What matters is what the researchers told them. They act like, and I'm sorry, you can't be like, ghrelin increase. Like, you can't do that, but by believing it, it can become so powerful. Like, it can actually change your physiology, Another example is we know creatine works. We know caffeine works. We have double-blind, placebo-controlled trials where it works. But they did a study where they did the same thing. They had people exercise, and they randomly gave them creatine or not, and randomly told them what they got, right? So you had people who didn't get creatine, told they didn't get it, but told they didn't get it, but got it, told they got it, didn't get it, and then told they got it and got it. What matters was what they told them. And they did the same thing with caffeine. Now, people will misinterpret that and say, well, see, creatine doesn't do anything or caffeine doesn't do anything. No. It just means your beliefs about what it does are actually more powerful than what it does. And they had a similar study with anabolic steroids. They told people, they had two groups of participants trained natty, and then they gave one group a placebo and told them, this is anabolic steroids. They gained more muscle and more strength.
Wild.
Because they believed it. So they probably trained harder. They probably believed that they could recover better. So, and again, like kind of going back to like what happens up here affects down here, you can't believe yourself into flying, right? Like there are limits to this. But I mean, there is something to be said for like when you talk to people who are really successful, you can walk away going, that person almost has like a delusional level of belief in themselves. You know what I mean? But you kind of gotta. So all that to say, when some of these studies come out and they're not well controlled, or there's no placebo, or somebody tells me about their experience, I go, that's interesting, but I'm just not sure I believe it.
So where do people start with all this? Because I'm just envisioning someone listening like, okay, I get it. Nobody on the internet really knows what the hell they're talking about. So how do I become the most healthy version of myself? How do I, where do I even start? What do I believe? What do I do? What do I do?
Yeah. So, I've kind of taken you through the journey of the Dunning-Kruger curve, right?
Yes.
Where when you first get into something, you're at the peak of Mount Stupid, where you believe you know a lot and you know very little. And then you go through the valley of despair, which was being grad school, which is like, I don't know anything, even though I did actually know quite a bit. And I do get that overwhelm. I think, again, if you're not going to go do a PhD, you do kind of have to follow some people that you trust. But again, I tell people never turn your brains off, But listen to people who, again, don't use superlatives or not using fear-based content. A lot of times we'll make a devil's advocate argument. So a lot of times if I'm talking about why I do something some way, I'll give the opposing argument for it, but then I'll explain why I think what I do is better, or what I believe is better, or what my opinion is better, right? A lot of times a real expert, if you ask them a question, they'll ask you a couple questions back to get appropriate context and nuance. And if they don't, they're probably going to add a lot. Like you ask me one question and I go on for 20 minutes.
Yep.
Right? Because I know what the caveats are to all that stuff. And so I'm really trying to make sure that I frame it in a way that's appropriate and people understand how that puzzle piece fits, right? Like the protein distribution thing.
Yeah.
That's 5% maybe, right? I think it's important, but I think it's 5%, right? And I also couch it with, hey, if you're not worried about being like the most jacked person you can be, then probably don't need to worry about it too much, right? Most people, the way that might be presented is, you're not eating enough protein-containing meals and it's killing your gains, No, it's not killing your gains. It's maybe not like completely optimized, but not everybody's trying to optimize their gains. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine. You can't optimize all the things all the time, because if you do, I've seen some of these people with like they read like every self-improvement book and their morning routine's like 4 hours long. And I'm like, okay, but when do you actually do the dang thing? You know? And that's another thing people probably will shock people. Like, how many books do you read a year? I'm like, a couple. And they're like, but I'm like, well, I spend a lot of time reading studies, you know, and I learn from people who are really smart, but a lot of times I'm busy out executing. Like if there's something specifically I need to get better at, like I read the book Boundaries this past year. If there's something specific I need to get better at, yeah, I'll read a book about it, right? But even then, books are people's opinions, you know? Like you can put citations in, that doesn't mean they're accurate. And again, like, you know, when I was talking about Gundry's thing, he actually commented and was like, well, all the citations are in my book. And I'm like, pulled up Red Pin Reviews, which is an independent review company that reviews the scientific accuracy of different publications. His book, one of his books was on there. I said, well, your scientific accuracy is 26%. So I don't really care that you have citations. So again, it is really difficult to navigate this landscape, but just, I guess, listen to people who are reasonable, you know, like a lot of times people will send me stuff and I'll go, come on, what do you really think? Like, what do you really think? Okay. Like we were talking earlier, like, cryotherapy saying it burns 500 calories, like for 3 minutes. Okay. So continue eating the same amount of food you're eating and you should start losing weight. And so you let me know if that works for you. Go ahead. Let me know. Or eat 500 calories more and you shouldn't gain weight. So you let me know how that works for you. And it's funny, nobody seems to do that. They don't want to do that. They just want to like pretend that they feel good and better. Hey, I've got no problem with cryotherapy. I'm not mad about it. But, you know, this just comes from, again, I give Don Layman a lot of credit. I had all these ideas coming into grad school. And then he would systematically explain why that was probably compensated for somewhere else in metabolism, or why I just got my ideas crushed so many times and I was wrong so many times. I just got okay with it, you know? And I think a lot of people get so invested in a way of doing things, not even for money outcome, but it's like people like to feel righteous and they're really insecure about the things they do. And so a lot of times it's like this, oh, I lost weight on low carb. I'm going to try it. Everybody do low carb now because it's the best thing. I got to show it's the best thing because it was the best. Who gives a shit if it's the best thing? It was the best thing for you. Like, you lost it. Great job. Fantastic. Why do you care what anybody else does? Like, okay, if somebody asks you for advice or, you know, whatever, cool. But like, why does it have to be the best thing for everybody? It's not. I promise you it's not. Okay? But it's because people are insecure about what they do. And they want to recruit people into their tribe so that they can feel better about what they do. And one of the things I always say is like, notice how I'm not trying to recruit anybody into anything. I literally don't care what you do. People, it's always funny. I tell people like, it's interesting it being a PhD in nutrition, because if I was a PhD in theoretical physics, if we're at a dinner party and people are meeting me, they're probably not going to like have too long of a conversation about string theory, you know, but because everyone eats, everybody's formed some opinion, some association between what they put in their mouth and what happens. Right. And often people say things like, oh, you know, you probably wouldn't approve. I'm like, I literally don't care. I don't care. I don't even care if somebody's overweight and they're happy with themselves. More power. But what else do you want from somebody? You know, what will bother me is when people are complaining and they're not actually taking action to change anything. Then you'll have me start stepping in. But I don't care what you do. It's no skin off my back.
Get outside of your comfort zone and into your best life, one small step at a time.
You do care if there's people that are talking about something that's inaccurate.
Correct.
So I want to talk to you about this because you spend a lot of time arguing with people online about what you believe.
It's like that meme, honey, hang on, I'll come to bed in a minute. There's people wrong on the internet.
I am very entertained by the whole thing. I love it. You know, I watch and I like every once in a while when you make a good point. But why? That's my question for you. And I remember you did post a really disturbing video at one point. There was this influencer who passed away. Mm-hmm. And that was when it hit me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this person was online saying to eat this way, and they actually died from eating that way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going to let you talk about your why behind that, and also thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's again, people will say, well, this person's just saying eat less processed food or do that. Isn't that a good overall message? The path to hell is paved with good intentions. Most people don't do the wrong thing knowing they're doing the wrong thing. Because if they do that, they're sociopaths, okay? If we do the wrong thing, we find a way to justify it to ourselves. We might deep down know it's not, but we find a way to justify it to ourselves, right? Like, I've talked about this before, but I had an affair in my first marriage, right? It's the most despicable thing I've ever done, almost 10 years ago, but I would say I've only recently gotten past it, forgiving myself for it. So I had this affair, but I found a way to justify it to myself, right? Because the human mind, you're not equipped to do the wrong thing repeatedly knowing you're doing the wrong thing. You find a way to justify it to yourself, again, unless you're a sociopath, right? And I'm sure there may be some psychologists out there that argue with me. That's fine. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But I'll take a really extreme example. Hitler might have believed he was doing the right thing because it might have really believed that the cause of all the problems were Jews. So when they say the path to hell is paved with good intentions, it is true. The question is, what is the outcome of what you're doing? That's the question, not your intentions. Okay, so I don't care what the intentions of these people are. Because some people are like, well, they're just trying to make money, or no, they really feel it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Here's the outcome. Okay? So people have more food anxiety now. Eating disorders are higher than ever. By the way, eating disorders, highest fatality rate of any mental health disease. It never gets talked about. People go, more than depression? Oh, yeah. Greater mortality rate than depression. And people don't talk about it because there's so much shame around it. Especially, obviously, people think about women when they think about eating disorders. A lot of men have eating disorders too. One of my coaches actually had one, almost died. This is 15 years ago. He had, PTSD from being in the military. And when you get to the etiology of eating disorders, a lot of it's around control, right? And the hospital called his parents and were like, you need to come because he's not going to make it another day. He ended up getting through that. Now he's doing great. He's a great coach at our team. His name's David Mathis. And, a lot of it stems from control, but also the things they hear. I got an email from somebody who worked at an eating disorder inpatient clinic who said we had just gotten a girl who's 75 pounds and we had just gotten her to start eating a little bit of oatmeal in the morning. And she saw Paul Saladino's video about how oatmeal is toxic, and now she's refusing to eat oatmeal. These things have downstream consequences. And people don't want to talk about it, but people get killed from this stuff. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to dump that all at Paul's feet or anything like that. I'm not trying to pick on him in general. This is across the board with people who use this fear-based tactics, is you really don't know what the downstream effects of that are. And I'll also tell people, I'm like, listen, the mind space you spend worrying about all this little shit that doesn't really come on, do you really think vegetables are toxic? Really, really deep down, be honest with yourself, right? Do you really think oatmeal is toxic? Oh yeah. The average calorie consumption in the United States is 3,500 calories a day, and people do less than 20 minutes of physical activity on average. But it's seed oils that are making us sick. It's vegetables that are making us sick. Come on. You're focusing on a scalpel when you need to be looking at the sledgehammer. You know what I mean? But this messaging, it gets people so confused and discombobulated, they don't know where to start. And I'll give you a perfect example of unintended consequences. The fear-mongering around Diet Cola, okay? Mm-hmm. So people will say, diet soda is worse for you than regular soda. Don't have it. Unequivocally untrue, okay? If we look at the human randomized control, if we look at the human randomized control trials, if they have people substitute in diet soda instead of regular soda, people lose weight. And oh, by the way, they lose more weight than people who they tell to drink water. There's now three or four studies showing this, wow, including a couple of meta-analyses showing that people who go from drinking soda and they have them drink diet soda or water, the people who drink diet soda lose more weight on average. It's not a ton, but they lose more. And people will say, well, diet soda triggers your appetite and insulin. If that's the case, how? How can these results be true? They can't be. They can't be true if what you're saying is true. They say, well, soda company doesn't care which one. Hey, they would love it for cola to be no different than Diet Cola. They don't care. It's all money in their pocket. And oh, by the way, they own the bottled water companies as well. So they don't really care. Okay. But again, if you are used to getting a sweet taste, you start drinking water, you might seek out that sweet taste somewhere else. It's not magic. People are it's a better satiety response with the diet soda. But the downstream effect is if you're telling people not to drink diet soda, and they'll say, well, I'm just trying to get people to drink water. But they don't drink water. They just go, well, I can't do that, so I'm just going to keep doing what I do. So they just keep drinking cola. Like, you are making the barrier to entry for people to start getting healthy way too high, because they feel like, oh, if I can't do all fresh grown, wild caught, organic, none of that stuff makes a big difference. It doesn't. The studies might show organic might have like a few more micronutrients, not enough to make a huge measurable difference. Okay, now if you like organic, eat organic. Cool. Another example, people go crazy over glyphosate. Well, they spray it on the crops and they spray it on the oatmeal and all this kind of stuff. Okay. So what do you think the vegetables are using, these fruits and vegetables are using in these studies? Do you think they're organic? Because they're not. So in literally every study we have looking at fruit and vegetable intake, it is inversely correlated with mortality, cancer, heart disease. People who eat more fruits and vegetables live longer, have less cardiovascular disease, less cancer. So either one of two things is happening. Either the amount of glyphosate that's on there is just not enough to have a negative effect, or these things are so healthy, it just completely wipes out any negative effects of glyphosate, right? Don't really care. Again, I'm looking at the outcome, right? But if you tell people, don't eat fruits and vegetables because it's sprayed with glyphosate, get organic. Well, what about the single mom with 4 kids who can't afford organic? Well, guess what? She just stops eating vegetables at all. And so you have done immeasurable harm while intending to do good. Mm-hmm. And so that's why when I talk about this stuff, I try to put it in the appropriate context, in the appropriate hierarchy of what's important, because otherwise it gets all jumbled up together. People get paralysis by analysis and they don't do anything.
What would you suggest to the person who's listening to this right now, who I'm thinking about in my mind, who is a health coach or a fitness professional, and they've been making content basically the way that you said not to, and they've been doing it for a while and they didn't mean any harm by it, but they believe this to be true because they saw the experience within them, and now they're listening to you and they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? How would you recommend they communicate? Can you go back from that? So this is hard for people, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I think... I'll be honest, I think that nobody listens to one thing and changes their mind. I think it plants a seed that eventually, maybe months and years down the road, people change, right? I've had so many people like message me, it's like, I used to hate you. And I just listened to your message and the consistency, and I saw how you walked the walk. You know, you practiced what you preached. Your whole team practices what you preach, and the results from that. And then over time, they change their minds. But I kind of doubt that anybody listening will just change it on the drop of a hat. But if they are interested, what I would say is, like, you know, it's very endearing to admit that you were wrong. People think it's going to, like, ruin their career. I think most people are actually, like, super understanding. And somebody has, like, the humility to come out and say, hey, guys, I was wrong about something.
It gives you more credibility.
For sure. And that's one of the things I've said. Like, you can look back and see the things I've changed my mind on. You can see all this. Like, most of this stuff I talk about, I thought a different way at a certain point. Like, it might have been 15, 20 years ago, but I did. And even recently, like, things I made money off of. I used to have a supplement company where I sold branched amino acids, and then enough data came out showing that they don't seem to do anything if you get enough total protein in. And so with my new supplement company, we don't sell branched amino acids, even though I talked about it for well over a decade, right? Made content around it. Like, I say, I had that one wrong, you know? But one of the things I'll tell people is what it does is it actually builds a lot of trust with your audience. Because if you have the humility to admit when you're wrong, and I'll tell people, and I said this to you earlier, when I plant my flag pretty strong, you should really pay attention, because it takes a lot for me to do that. It really takes a lot for me to do that, because one, I want to do the best thing possible for myself, because I'm an athlete. Like, I want to go to world championships. Like, I don't want to be doing anything suboptimally for what I do, right? Also, like, I don't want egg on my face. Like, I want to get stuff right. You know, I care I always tell people, I love being right. I'll do cartwheels in my living room if I'm right. But I care more about getting the right answer. Because I'd rather debunk my own stuff than have somebody come out later and be like, and you're wrong, right? Because this. And I've had that. And I'll give you a great example. Kind of small, but a few months ago, I made some content around dietary fiber. And I said the average American intake of dietary fiber is 6 grams per day. And I forget where I got this number from. And a dietitian in the comments said, that's wrong. The average intake's 13 grams per day. Cited the references. I went and looked them up, and I'm like, I pinned the comment. I said, you're right. I was wrong about this. Thank you for correcting me. How hard was that? It's not hard. Amazing. Like and now I changed the way I say that. I don't use that number. It's not as sexy. It's not as sensationalist, but it's still like it's valid, right? And I think there's so many people, and even people who are smart. In fact, one of the things I've gotten really interested in, let me back up because I didn't answer your question. I would say if you are interested in trying to do things differently, one, get mentorship from somebody you respect who has done that, who has gone back and said, hey, I was wrong about something. Get some mentorship with that. Get some education. I mean, obviously, like, I'm biased, but I have a course called Physique Coaching Academy where it's basically like we teach you all this stuff. Like, we teach you the ins and outs of nutrition and resistance training and cardiovascular exercise. And it's kind of like a 6 to 12 month course that's the equivalent of what I would say like a university level degree, just specifically focused on this stuff, right? But like, just pay attention and be open to being wrong, and don't use such strong statements. And you know what's going to happen? Your engagement's going to go down. It's going to be hard. And a lot of times content creators end up having the tail wag the dog, which is they create a piece of content. It does really, really well. All of a sudden, all their content's that format, about the same topic, over and over, which is why you got people in grocery stores with their shirt off, screaming about ingredients, looking like morons. Because for some people, they love seeing that stuff. For other people, it's like a train wreck, but they're still going to watch the train wreck. I mean, Liver King, right? When the first time it got sent to me, it was like 12,000 followers. And I'm like, no, this is obvious parody. Nobody's going to take this serious. And then I look up and he's got over 1 million followers and he's making tons of money. And I was like, wow, people don't realize, like, I used to think, well, snake oil salesmen, they won't have longevity in the industry. And I still think for the most part, you're not going to have as much longevity, right? Like, I've been in the industry for 20 years. And I think just now, like, I'm starting to kind of hit more mainstream and whatnot. And it's taken a long time. And it's a very crowded marketplace. And if you want to get noticed quickly, the best way to do it is to have some shtick and start saying crazy shit. Like, that's the best way to get noticed. But, like, how long is that going to last? Right? And can you actually feel good about yourself doing that stuff? And if you can, like, it's pretty rough. And so there's always new people coming in. Average lifespan of people interested in fitness is less than 2 years. So there's always new people coming in, people leaving. And so that's why so many things that we were talking about this earlier, colostrum's making a comeback, HMB's making a comeback, pyruvate's making a comeback, ectosterone's making a comeback. These are all things that were being marketed when I was a kid. Like, this isn't new. But the stuff that works, it doesn't leave. Okay? Creatine never went out of fashion. Caffeine never went out of fashion, right? Resistance training, it never stopped. Well, yeah, it kind of fell out of fashion. No, it didn't, because it works, right? That stuff works. But, it is tough when you have experts who have great credentials. I mean, I'm thinking about Robert Lustig, who is, I think he's a professor at, I don't know if it's Stanford, somewhere out in California. He was on a podcast, and I'm sure he heard these results from somebody else, and he just didn't question or whatever. He said there was a study out of Copenhagen where they gave a liter of cola a day for 6 months, or it's either a liter of cola, full fat milk, diet cola, or water, right? And he said at the end of the 6 months, the cola group gained 10 kilos of I can't remember if he said body weight or body fat. Diet soda gained 2 kilos. Whole milk, I think he said, didn't maybe lost a little bit, and water lost a little bit. And so I actually went and looked at the study because I remember thinking, man, 10 kilos in 6 months. Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot, even for a liter of cola a day. So I found the study. It was out of Copenhagen, and I'd seen it get cited in his blog recently. So I'm like, okay, this is the study. Study showed it was actually semi-skim milk. So first thing. And the people in the cola group gained 1.5 kilos. The people in the Diet Cola group gained the least amount of weight of anybody in the study. I think the whole milk group gained the semi-skim milk gained about the same as the cola group. And then the water group gained similar to Diet Cola. They even said in the study, in the conclusions, basically all the parameters between the water and the Diet Cola group were similar. But millions of people got this podcast, and I was the only one who fact-checked this thing, who actually went and looked at this study, out of millions of people. And I can remember another time there was Dr. Tara Swart, who, again, great credentials. I believe she's a neuroscientist. She said there was a study where they had people think about lifting weights for 2 weeks, and they increased their muscles by 13%.
I heard that. Mm-hmm. Not true.
Not true. So there was, and I looked forever for the study. There was a study where they had people visualize finger adduction, so like this, right? And they were able to increase that strength by visualization by about 13%. I think it was over 8 or 12 weeks, something like that. But that is a far cry from you think about it and you build muscle, right? And again, I'm sure she's a very smart person, but she probably just heard this, just like I heard the 6 grams of dietary fiber and just said it, right? And so I think what I would say, a lot of people say, well, these people are well educated, can't you cut them a break? No, because if we are perceived as experts, we need to hold ourselves to the absolute highest, most rigorous standard, because if we don't do it, who will? And so that's why, again, I call myself out when I get it wrong, and the 6 grams of dietary fiber versus 13. Some people might go, it's not a big deal. You're off by 7 grams of fiber a day, whatever. Who cares? I care, because I don't want to just repeat something that I heard. And actually, I was pretty disappointed in myself that I hadn't fact checked it, because there's a lot of stuff around up there. And so when I was writing my books, I would find myself writing a line of text and then go, can I really support that? Okay. And so then I just ended up citing everything, and some of the stuff I ended up changing because I'm like, oh, I actually don't have citations to support that. I've got to change it. It's different than what I thought, or there's some caveats to it or some nuance to it, but it made me better. I learned way more by doing that. And I think so many people, I think the other tough thing is if you're getting well known, you're getting a lot of praise, you can start to believe your own hype. Yeah. And that can go both ways. A lot of people, I had a client, one of my first clients ever, actually, this almost 20 years ago. He was an estate planning attorney, and he was like, just do me a favor. Don't read too much of your own hype and don't read too much of your own criticism. Okay? Because neither one's good for you. And actually, my best friend, one of the things I really value about him, the most successful person I know, absolute business savant. And when I do something right, he will be like, man, you crushed that. That was awesome. And then also once a week, he texts me, he's like, bro, take that shit down off your story. Come on, what are you doing? Or if I, if I don't handle something right or, whatever. So, but I've built that trust, and, people in my circle now, I've built that trust that hey, if they're giving me criticism, it's from a place of love. You know what I mean? And if they're giving me positive feedback, they're not just stroking my ego, because 10 years ago, probably had way too many people around me who were just telling me how great I was. And turns out they had ulterior motives, I made a lot of people a lot of money, and I went through a lot of heartbreak, personally and professionally. But again, that's one thing I would say to content creators out there too, is have people that tell you the truth. Have people in your circle that tell you the truth, and be open to feedback. But there's also criticism has to be balanced from somebody. It's almost like coaching is so important to have balance. if you just got somebody who's only criticizing you, you're either going to become so hyper self-critical, you'd be frozen, or you're just going to start tuning that person out, right? It's like the tyrant coach who was always yelling at everybody. But by the same token, if somebody's always just telling you how great you are, it's not super helpful either, you know? But if you got people who tell you the truth, like honestly, in my opinion, one of the biggest things you can do for your mental health is look at the people who are around you.
Yes.
Like, do they tell me the truth? Are they supportive of what I want to do? Even if I make a wrong decision, do they still love me even if they don't agree with my decision? That's a really important one. Because I mean, I even had like our mutual friend Gabrielle, we were talking about something the other day. She goes, hey, listen, if you make this decision, I will support you. I don't agree with it, but I support you on it. Okay. I have your back 100%. And that's a friend, you know? And so I think that's important. And I think like your circle will tell you who you are, right? Over time. And one of the things I said to Dr. Layne was, I was like, man, look at this group of people who came up for your award, who like you've inspired, who are all basically studs in their own right now, like who are, you know, out there making a big change. Like that is such a huge, like, just, it shows who you are, you know? So yeah, content creators out there, just play the long game. You know, I know it is really fashionable to want to try to rush success. I am so grateful. I'm honestly so grateful that it took me as long as it did to get the notoriety I have, to accumulate the financial success I've had, because at every single point I got to go, that's cool. You know, like every single little thing, it was like, that's cool. Like the first time I flew first class, I'm like, that's cool. I still do. I'm like, this is cool. You know, the first time I had anybody who was like even close to a celebrity, who's actually like, Brian Callen's a close personal friend of mine, that I hung out with him like, this is cool. You know, like at every single point it felt cool, but if it had come really fast, all of a sudden, where do you go from there? You know, like I'm actually grateful that it took me time. And, you know, you build something with, again, for my creators out there, you build something that is sustainable with a true base. You don't have to worry about it all crumbling down overnight. Like if you built it slow, I have a friend who, she's really smart business person too. And she said, most businesses don't crumble overnight. They crumble, they erode slowly over time. And when they go down, it looks like it happened overnight. But the decisions that were made that led to them crumbling started many years beforehand. And so, but if you try to blow up fast, you are very likely to fall apart fast. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people, I'm like, stop chasing virality. Mm-hmm. Stop chasing virality. Because it's not a sustainable model.
Have you heard or seen the blog, The Boy Who Ate Himself? That story? I'm going to send it to you right after this.
Okay.
It's a story about a YouTuber. Was a young kid when he first started, and he just started eating on YouTube and like telling a story while he was eating. And one of his videos got so many likes and so many views that he just kept eating, and people wanted him to eat more, and they wanted him to eat more unhealthy foods. And they're like, eat this, and let's see how much you can eat. And go look at this whole story, and you'll see what he looks like now. It's a breathing machine. He's huge, obese, and he's just giving basically the audience what they wanted. He was chasing the virality. It's the biggest mistake that you can make. And I love that you talked about like the goalpost always moves, right? Like once you hit the goal, all right, you celebrate it for 5 seconds. Yep. Yay, amazing. All right, now what's next? And then if you're not equipped, or you didn't equip yourself with everything that you needed to get to that next goalpost, you're going to be pretty screwed. So that's why I love the long game too. And that's why I'm such a fan of your career, because you've been in this for a really long time. What's next for you?
Oh, well, right now I'm kind of doing the podcast tour thing, you know, like I'm enjoying just getting interviewed by some of these big podcasts. And like obviously I've followed your work for a while, and it was very fun to be on here. So I do think at a certain point, I don't want to put a date on it because people start asking me, I'm going to have my own podcast. I'm going to start. Good. Because I do feel like, you know, I have a unique sort of offering for people. And then I do think at some point I want to do a book, like go through the traditional book route, because I've self-published some books, but I would want to go through a publisher and really try to hit a wide net. But honestly, I've built most of the things I want to build in business. I just want to focus on growing those. Our nutrition coaching app that you talked about, Carbon Diet Coach, has done extremely well. My website, biolayne.com, has done extremely well. My research review, Physique Coaching Academy, Outwork Nutrition. I'm really focused on okay, we've got what the stuff we need. Like all the stuff I use on a day-to-day basis is in our purview. Now I'm focused on all right, how do we, culture of the company? How do we, help our team win? And just honestly, this is going to sound really hokey, but I just want to help as many people as I can. I think, I tell our team, if I care about financial success, because with our values, if we're doing well financially, it means we are helping a lot of people. But I try to remember not to just chase the financial success. If I reach a lot of people and I help a lot of people, the money will take care of itself. And honestly, I've already done better than I ever could have imagined in my entire life. So if it never gets better than this, I'm good, And I just want to do more cool shit and have more cool moments, do more big speaking engagements. And then obviously I've got world championships coming up for powerlifting. I love to still compete in that. I guess I'm kind of weird in that scientist, entrepreneur, and then also world level, athlete, masters now. But, that's the stuff that makes me feel alive and the stuff I love doing. And I love coming and having these conversations. I love connecting with people. That's what's fun for me. So I just want to continue to excel in those areas and do what I'm good at. And, but eventually podcast and book will be the next things.
You heard it here first, guys. Podcast and book. I could talk to you for 3 more hours. Seriously, this was so valuable, and we went everywhere today. You guys, you're walking away with everything.
There's a lot of stuff rattling around up there.
It's so good. I didn't even have to do anything. I got to sit back and listen. It was amazing. You're incredible. I'm such a fan. Is there anything you want to leave everybody with? What can they do to help you, support you, or even just one big, massive takeaway that you want to leave them with?
You want to support me, just go to my Instagram, biolayne.com, follow me, check out the stuff in my bio. That's where you can find all the stuff I sell and the products and services that I use. That's easy. Message-wise, I'm going to combine anecdote and science. So Ethan Suplee, are you familiar with him? So he's a Hollywood actor. He was in Remember the Titans? He always, My name is Earl. He always played the big fat guy. He's lost 300 pounds now and kept it off. Looks basically like a special forces operator, now in his movies, And I asked him this question. I also asked my brother, because my brother was addicted to meth, went to jail for a little while, actually. He's not really on social media, but he's told me he's fine with me to talk about this stuff. I asked him, I said, what was your rock bottom? What changed things for you? Was it jail? And he goes, no. He goes, I just woke up one day and I realized I lose everything. I get a job and I lose it. I get a relationship and I lose it. I get some money and I lose it. I just got sick and tired of losing. And Ethan had kind of a similar story. He said, Eric Thomas says, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change, that's when we change. And so I asked people how much pain are you in, right? So Ethan said, I went and did a ruck yesterday with a 50-pound ruck on. It was really hard. And then I think I used to carry around 6 of those all day. No matter how hard it is for me to go to the gym for 90 minutes a day or do that, my life is so much easier now. We were talking about this earlier with the mental health thing and getting to the gym. There's a great paradox of life, which is the following. Whatever makes it easier in the short term will make your life harder in the long term. And whatever makes life hard in the short term will make it easier in the long term. You save money, you budget, it's hard. You want to go do the stuff you want to do. But guess what? At a certain point, like Dave Ramsey says, you live like no one else, and later you can live like no one else. You resistance train. It's hard. Your muscles burn. It aches. You get soreness. Long term, you have less pain. You're more metabolically healthy. You live longer. You watch Netflix for 8 hours a day. Scroll social media. It's easy in the long term. It's easy in the short term. Makes your life hard in the long term. So go start doing hard things and be okay with it being hard. Like I had a friend who was a 12-year Navy SEAL sniper. He actually, his name's Ryan Bates. He had a show on Netflix called Deadliest Forces on Earth. Awesome, super funny guy. And he said, it's not that Navy SEALs feel less discomfort. We just accept it. We don't try to feel good. A lot of your pain comes from comparison of feeling like this should feel easier. Like, no, it should feel hard. Be okay with it being hard. Accept it being hard. But in the long term, your life will get better. And think about the person you want to be in 5 years. Okay? So if they're wealthy, if they're in shape, what kind of daily habits do you think they have? Start executing those now. So reverse engineer who you want to be and start doing those habits and behaviors. And it's okay for it to be hard. It's okay.
Layne Norton, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's okay for it to be hard.